Darkness held the young prince captive within an endless, silent void. For 1,000 continuous years, his soul fought alongside legendary gods and mythical warriors in the celestial hall of heroes. Suddenly, the brilliant memories of a millennium shattered like fragile glass. A heavy, suffocating weight pressed down mercilessly on his chest. Prince Davy slowly forced his heavy, encrusted eyelids open to see a dusty canopy overhead. His fingers twitched weakly against the rough fabric of the thin bedsheets. He stared down at his frail arms, shocked by how thin and brittle they had become. This was his original physical body, the one that had been left behind in the mortal world. The poison from his brother's blade had plunged him into this pathetic, helpless state 6 years ago. The memory of the betrayal burned fiercely in his mind, igniting a quiet rage. He tried to sit up, forcing his unresponsive muscles to cooperate. His weak body collapsed back onto the pillows, completely drained of stamina. He closed his eyes to check the state of his internal mana core. Deep within his soul, an immense ocean of pure holy energy stirred violently. The training from the realm of heroes had not disappeared into thin air. He began to chant a low-level high-heel spell taught by the goddess of life. Strands of emerald light began to weave tightly around his brittle limbs. The deep aches in his muscles dissolved instantly as the holy magic worked its wonders. With his newfound strength, Davy successfully swung his legs over the edge of the bed. His bare feet touched the freezing cold stone floor of the palace room. He looked around the room, noting the thick layers of dust covering every piece of furniture. It was obvious that the royal court had entirely abandoned the forgotten prince to die. He walked unsteadily toward a tall, cracked, full-length mirror standing in the corner. A fragile 16-year-old boy with wild silver hair stared back at him through the cracks. Despite the weak physical appearance, those eyes held the terrifying weight of a 1,000-year warrior. He raised his hand and channeled a small trace of dark necromancy just to test his bond with the underworld. Black mist crackled violently at his fingertips, responding instantly to his call. Both the ultimate holy magic and the forbidden dark arts were fully at his disposal. Suddenly, the faint sound of heavy, hurried footsteps echoed from the long corridor outside. The footsteps grew louder, accompanied by the harsh, mocking laughter of multiple men. Davy immediately masked his immense magical aura, returning to his guise of a helpless invalid. He arranged the blankets over his legs and adopted a perfectly fragile, vacant expression. The heavy iron lock clicked loudly, and the bedroom door was violently kicked open. 3 arrogant palace guards walked into the room carrying dirty buckets and laughing rudely. The lead guard froze in absolute shock when he noticed Davy sitting upright on the bed. Recovering quickly, the guard sneered insolently at the newly awakened prince. Davy remained perfectly still, watching their disrespectful behavior with an icy, hidden calculation. The guard rudely demanded to know how the useless trash prince had finally managed to wake up. Beneath the heavy blanket, Davy's fingers began to glow with a sharp, lethal emerald spark. The foolish guards had absolutely no idea that they were standing in front of an awakened god of war. The royal guards continued to snicker among themselves, completely oblivious to the monstrous aura radiating from the fragile boy standing before them. Davy adjusted his worn sleeves, suppressing the sheer magnitude of his divine mana to match the frail vessel he now inhabited. He took a slow, deliberate step forward, the faint clicking of his boots echoing against the high stone walls. Suddenly, a sharp, mocking voice pierced through the silence from the far end of the long gallery. Prince Carlos walked into view, his silk cape billowing arrogantly behind him as he sneered at his newly awakened brother. Behind him followed an entourage of corrupt nobles, all whispering behind their silk fans like vultures waiting for a corpse. Carlos stopped a mere 2 paces away, looking down his nose at Davy's noticeably thin frame. He openly laughed, declaring that a pathetic vegetable should have had the decency to remain asleep forever. Davy merely blinked, his deep eyes observing the exact biological weak points on his brother's arrogant neck. In his 1,000 years of training with immortal legends, he had learned countless ways to sever a man's life force without shedding a single drop of blood. But he knew that a quick death would be far too merciful for the monsters who orchestrated his downfall. Davy purposely lowered his head, feigning a look of fragile terror to satisfy his brother's massive ego. Seeing this submissive display, Carlos scoffed loudly and turned his back, thoroughly convinced that the prince was completely broken. As soon as the prince turned around, Davy raised his gaze, a terrifying smile creeping across his pale face. The real mastermind of the tragedy, however, was waiting further inside the palace walls. Queen Linus sat gracefully on her velvet settee, sipping exotic tea while listening to the official reports of Davy's sudden awakening. Her beautiful face contorted into a cold, venomous expression as she realized her past assassination attempt had failed to finish the job permanently. A few moments later, the heavy oak doors opened silently, and Davy stepped into the Queen's private audience chamber. The Queen instantly masked her pure hatred, plastering a sweet maternal smile across her flawless face as she welcomed him back. She walked toward him, her long silk dress rustling smoothly against the expensive patterned carpet. Davy felt an instinctive wave of pure nausea as her perfumed hand reached out to gently touch his cheek. She softly whispered words of false comfort, claiming she had prayed every single night to the gods for his miraculous recovery. Davy secretly marveled at her spectacular acting skills, remembering vividly that she was the one who handed the poison to his assassin 6 years ago. He forced his voice to tremble slightly, thanking his wonderful mother for her immense kindness and endless devotion. Queen Linus's eyes flashed with deep satisfaction, firmly believing that the poison had successfully destroyed his royal spirit and intelligence. She then casually mentioned that because of his long illness, his official royal allowance had been heavily reduced for his own protection. This was a blatant lie to starve his remaining household and force his last loyal servants to abandon him in disgrace. Davy meekly nodded his compliance, understanding completely that the entire palace financial department was firmly under her venomous thumb. He quietly extended his perception outward, sending tiny, invisible threads of pure holy mana weaving through the walls of the entire palace structure. Within seconds, his advanced sensory magic mapped out every single corrupt official currently plotting in the hidden rooms below. He could clearly hear the distant sounds of palace administrators laughing about how much money they had stolen from his personal estate. Davy withdrew his presence slowly, a silent, absolute death sentence now marked upon every single one of their names. Queen Linus smoothly dismissed him, waving her hand dismissively as if she were discarding a piece of useless trash. Davy turned and left the room quietly, the heavy oak doors closing shut behind him with a dull, echoing thud. Walking down the lonely corridor, he knew his very first priority was to gather his true allies and secure his immediate surroundings. He thought of Amy, his sole remaining maid, who had protected his comatose body for 6 long years despite facing starvation and constant abuse from the staff. She was currently being harassed by the corrupt head chef in the lower kitchens over a simple loaf of stale bread. Davy's steps quickened as a dark, cold anger boiled deep within his ancient, immortal soul. It was finally time to show these pathetic palace parasites exactly what happens when you touch the belongings of a supreme king. As he approached the kitchen doors, a sudden shard of broken glass shattered loudly inside, followed by a desperate, agonizing scream from his faithful maid. The echoing shatter of glass inside the kitchen caused Davy's newfound mana to spike with dangerous intent. He forcefully threw open the heavy oak doors to find a scene of cruel humiliation unfolding before him. His faithful maid Amy was kneeling on the cold stone floor, desperately trying to protect a spilled bowl of meager soup. Standing over her was the bloated palace head chef, his face twisted in a smug sneer as he raised his foot to kick her hand away. Davy moved with a supernatural speed that defied his frail, newly awakened physical form. Before the chef's boot could descend, Davy's slender hand clamped around the man's thick ankle like an iron vise. With a slight twist of his wrist, Davy shattered the man's ankle bones, forcing a guttural scream from the tyrant's throat. The surrounding kitchen staff gasped in absolute horror, dropping their utensils as they recognized the forgotten prince. Davy ignored the groaning man and knelt beside Amy, checking her hands for any deep wounds from the shards. A faint glimmer of green holy magic emanated from his fingertips, instantly soothing her cuts and bruises. Amy looked up at her master through tear-filled eyes, her voice trembling as she apologized for failing to secure a proper meal. Davy comforted her by stating that she had done nothing wrong, turning his gaze back to the weeping chef on the floor. The head chef clutched his broken ankle, spitting curses and threatening to report the assault to the palace steward. Davy simply smiled, a terrifyingly serene expression that made the chef's blood run completely cold. He demanded the immediate production of the palace household financial ledgers for the past 6 years. Realizing the prince was no longer an easy target, a terrified assistant cook ran out to fetch the head steward. Minutes later, Steward Malik entered the kitchen, his posture dripping with condescension as he adjusted his expensive silk robes. Malik reminded Davy that the royal family had cut the prince's budget due to his long, unproductive coma. Davy merely gestured to a nearby wooden table, ordering the steward to place the books down before he lost his patience. Sweating under Davy's intense gaze, Malik ordered his subordinates to bring out the thick, leather-bound financial books. Davy flipped through the pages at an incredible speed, his mind calculating numbers faster than any normal human could comprehend. The records revealed blatant embezzlement, showing that 80% of Davy's allocated funds had been stolen by the staff. He slammed the book shut, the loud crack echoing through the room like a sudden clap of thunder. Davy pointed out specific fraudulent transactions, naming the exact dates and matching luxury items Malik had purchased for himself. Malik staggered backward, his face turning ghostly pale as his carefully hidden crimes were effortlessly laid bare. Desperate to maintain control, the steward blustered that the prince had no legal authority to punish palace staff without the queen's approval. Davy reminded him that as a royal prince, his word within his own household was absolute law. With a flick of his wrist, Davy unleashed a wave of dark mana that forced Malik and the head chef flat onto the stone floor. The corrupt officials writhed in agony, feeling as if an invisible mountain had been placed directly onto their chests. Davy declared that all their ill-gotten assets were officially confiscated to pay back the stolen royal treasury. The surrounding servants immediately fell to their knees, begging for mercy and swearing absolute loyalty to the awakened prince. Davy ordered the guards stationed outside to drag Malik and the chef to the dungeons until further notice. 2 armored royal guards entered, hesitant at first, but quickly obeyed after sensing Davy's overwhelming magical pressure. With the traitors removed, Davy turned back to Amy and handed her a heavy pouch of gold retrieved from Malik's vest. He appointed her as the new head of the prince's household, promising she would never suffer from poverty again. Word of the sudden purge in the prince's palace spread like wildfire through the capital's underground networks. Davy spent the next several days quietly refining his core, his broken mana circles slowly knitting back together stronger than ever. He knew this domestic victory was merely the first step in dismantling the vast web of enemies surrounding him. Unexpectedly, a loud commotion at the front courtyard disrupted his meditation session later that week. The doors burst open to reveal his younger siblings, Winley and Boris, covered in dust and breathing heavily as if fleeing a disaster. Winley gasped out that the royal court had suddenly ordered them to attend a dangerous continental fencing tournament across the border. Before Davy could reply, a dark magical arrow shattered the window pane, embedding itself deeply into the wooden table directly between them. Wrapped around the shaft was a blood-red parchment note containing a sinister warning from the Queen's elite assassination squad. Prince Davy stared coldly at the blood-red parchment note containing a sinister warning from the Queen's elite assassination squad. He calmly channeled a microscopic spark of white holy flame directly from his index finger onto the edges of the threatening paper. The paper disintegrated into fine ash within seconds, leaving absolutely no trace of its existence upon his pristine desk. Standing up from his wooden chair, he adjusted the heavy silver cuffs of his royal blue tunic with precise movements. It was finally time to step outside the isolated palace walls and reunite with the only family members who truly cared for him. As he stepped into the grand courtyard, a vibrant figure clad in pristine white leather armor bolted directly toward him. Princess Winley threw her arms around Davy's neck, her long golden ponytail swinging wildly through the crisp morning air. Davy patted her back gently, feeling the unexpected strength in her arms cultivated from years of intense swordsmanship training. A few paces behind them, Prince Boris approached with a warm smile, adjusting his spectacles as he carried a thick leather book. Boris extended his hand toward Davy, expressing profound relief that his brother had fully recovered from the long coma. Winley pulled back and proudly drew her slender silver rapier, executing a flawless, lightning-fast salute in front of Davy. Davy immediately noticed the faint hum of aura radiating from her blade, recognizing her raw talent that surpassed ordinary knights. She loudly declared that she would protect her frail older brother during their long trek to the continental tournament. Davy merely smirked, hiding the fact that his current power could easily obliterate entire armies with a single gesture. Boris pointed toward a magnificent black carriage adorned with the royal crest, indicating that their departure time had arrived. The 3 siblings climbed into the spacious velvet interior, settling down as the heavy wooden wheels began to roll forward. As the palace faded into the distance, Davy looked through the glass window, spotting several suspicious shadows moving along the high walls. He immediately realized that Queen Linus's spies were tailing their convoy, waiting for the perfect moment to strike deep in the forest. To keep his siblings completely unaware, Davy opened a small leather flask and poured a refreshing herbal tea for everyone. Winley happily drank the tea, launching into an elaborate explanation of the famous knights she hoped to challenge at the venue. Boris provided historical context about the tournament's origins, his voice acting as a soothing backdrop to the rhythmic clattering of the wheels. Hours later, the carriage suddenly lurked to a violent halt as the dense, foggy canopy of the Whispering Woods surrounded them. A piercing whistle echoed from the thicket, followed instantly by the terrified neighing of their elite royal horses. Winley immediately kicked the carriage door wide open and leaped outside, her drawn rapier gleaming defiantly against the encroaching fog. Dozens of masked assassins clad in dark purple wraps materialized from the treetops, wielding poisoned daggers. Davy stepped out of the vehicle with slow, deliberate steps, his hands casually tucked deep inside his pockets. Baris followed closely behind, raising a protective barrier scroll that emanated a soft, translucent yellow light around them. The lead assassin smirked mockingly, demanding that the useless, weak prince surrender his life without making a futile struggle. Winley charged forward like a streak of pure gold, her blade clashing sharply against 3 enemies simultaneously. While she kept the bulk of the attackers busy, 2 assassins slipped through her defense and sprinted directly toward Davy. Davy softly whispered a single ancient rune word, activating a hidden Tier 4 gravity spell beneath the soil. Instantly, an overwhelming force crushed the 2 rushing assassins face first into the muddy ground, shattering their weapons entirely. The remaining attackers froze in absolute horror as they felt the suffocating, godlike pressure emanating from the fragile prince. Davy slowly raised his right arm, snapping his fingers with a crisp sound that echoed clearly through the silent woods. A massive pillar of pure, radiant, holy light erupted from the heavens, completely vaporizing every single assassin into nothingness. The fog instantly dispersed, revealing a perfectly clear sky above the pristine, unharmed royal carriage convoy. Winley assumed a traveling high-ranking mage had saved them from afar, cheering loudly for their incredible stroke of good luck. Baris smiled and nodded in agreement, though he cast a brief, intensely curious glance toward his enigmatic older brother. Davy gave them an innocent smile, urging them to climb back inside so they wouldn't miss the tournament registration deadline. With all obstacles permanently removed, the carriage rolled onward toward a bright future where Davy would fully reclaim his true destiny.